Welcome to reading time on our reading blanket. Boa ate the wash. How was your class trip to the farm? Oh, boring, kind of dull, until the cow started crying. A cow crying? Yeah, you see, a haystack fell on her. But a haystack doesn't just fall over. It does if a farmer crashes into it. A farmer wouldn't do that. He would if he were too busy yelling at the pigs to get off our school bus. What were the pigs doing on the bus? Eating our lunches. Why were they eating your lunches? Because we threw their corn at each other and they didn't have anything to eat. Well, that makes sense, but why were you throwing their corn? Because we ran out of eggs. Out of eggs? Why were you throwing eggs? Because of the boa constrictor. The boa constrictor? Yeah, Jimmy's pet boa constrictor. What was Jimmy's pet boa constrictor doing on the farm? Oh, he brought it to meet all the farm animals, but the chickens didn't like it. You mean he took it into the hen house? Yeah, and the chickens started squawking and flying around. Go on, what happened? Well, one hen got excited and laid an egg. And it landed on Jimmy's head. The hen? No, the egg. And it broke, yucky, all over her hair. What did she do? She got mad because she thought Tommy threw it, so she threw one at him. What did Tommy do? Oh, he ducked, and the egg hit Marianne in the face. So she threw one at Jenny, but she missed and hit Jimmy, who dropped his pet boa constrictor. Oh, and I know the next thing you knew everyone was throwing eggs, right? Right. And when you ran out of eggs, you threw the pig's corn, right? Right again. Well, what finally stopped it? Well, we heard the farmer's wife screaming. Why was she screaming? We never found out because Mrs. Stanley made us get on the bus and we sort of left in a hurry without the boa constrictor. I bet Jimmy was sad because he left his pet boa constrictor. Oh, not really. We left in such a hurry that one of the pigs didn't get off the bus, so now he has a pet pig. Boy, that sure sounds like an exciting trip. Yeah, I suppose, if you're the kind of kid who likes class trips to the farm. Okay, raise your hand if you are wondering why in the world you came to class today and had to listen to me read you a children's story. Do you think it would have been a little bit different if before we started reading the story I told you some key things to listen for? Maybe a certain type of sentence structure, or maybe some themes. Let's pay attention to what the conflict is, or what one thing is caused by another thing. Or maybe we're going to use this story as a metaphor for something. What could, for example, the eggs be a metaphor for? Why would they keep missing each other? Would it make some difference if I started out that way and you were listening for certain things? Playing with those metaphors, if now I told you that I want you to go back and think about what the eggs could be a metaphor for, or what the boa constrictor could be a metaphor for, or some other elements, some characters, or the bus, or the haystack, you would have to think really hard to figure that out, because when you were listening to the story, you weren't thinking about those things. Instead, you were thinking, Why in the world is my teacher making me listen to this? So instead of paying attention and listening for something specific, you were thinking about something else, wondering where all of this is going, what's the point, and now, for me to bring out some point that I think you could go back and figure out, that's really difficult. It'd be really difficult for you to come up with something off the bat. You could go and read it again and figure it out, but right now, figure out, tell me, what could the bus represent? You have to think, what did the bus even do? Let me tell you why all of this was confusing and why you weren't thinking about the right things, why you were wondering what the point was instead of listening for metaphors or paying attention to sentence structure or some other theme. It's because you walked in and we started reading a story. I gave you no introduction. The introduction is so important. If you had sat down and I told you to pay attention to something specific, then we would have read the story and you would have been listening for that specific thing. But I didn't. I didn't give you an introduction. So often, your papers are exactly like that. So what does an introduction do? Well, it starts you thinking about the right thing. Instead of wondering, does this have a point? Where is she going with this? You're already listening for something specific. You understand where this is going, so you understand it without rereading it. There are multiple times that you have to use an introduction, especially, most importantly, at the beginning of your paper. You have one full paragraph that prepares the reader to understand what you're going to present. You set up your argument. You don't need big, vague statements that mean nothing to your argument, that don't contribute to the paper whatsoever. You give them the pertinent information and you get them to start thinking about what you want them to be focusing on, so that when you present your ideas, they're not wondering, where is she going with this? Within the paper, there are other times that you need introductions as well. For example, if you're going to use a quote or any other type of evidence, some kind of example, you don't just drop it in. You lead into it, or in other words, you introduce it by letting us know what we're supposed to be thinking about. We don't read your mind. If you don't tell us why you're using a piece of evidence, we don't know. If you give no introduction at all to some quote or some type of evidence, it's called being dropped. Sometimes you'll see professors write that you have a dropped quote in your essay. That's what it means. You didn't introduce it. You just stuck it in there. It means nothing. Any type of evidence can be taken either way. That's why in court, the other side gets to cross-examine every witness. Anything can be taken more than one way. So if you don't explain yourself, introduce and explain yourself, you're just handing over your evidence to the other side. So you are responsible for making me follow your thought process. Which brings me to my next point. Have you ever had a teacher tell you that you needed to work on flow? Or that your paper is choppy? Flow seems like such a vague word, doesn't it? You want your paper to flow. How do you make it flow? What does that mean? I mean, commas, you can at least have some specific rules to go by, but flow? Most students don't actually know what that means. So I'm going to explain it to you. If you are going to take a child and help them accomplish some task, you have to walk them through step by step. If they've never done some particular chore before, you can't just tell them to go do it and then figure it out. When you're writing a paper, you kind of have to have that vision of walking them through step by step. You don't get to skip any steps. You don't get to assume that they just know what you're thinking. Nothing is self-explanatory. Anything you put in your paper should have a reason, should have some logical order to why you put it there, but you connect the dots. You have evidence everywhere. You connect it by your introductions and explanations. That's flow. Or in other words, flow is your way of helping us make the connection between one idea to the next, so that we don't feel like, okay, we're here and suddenly, oh, now we're thinking about this. Oh, now we're thinking about it. What is this evidence about? That is choppy. Flow is when you explain that everything is connected. So now that you understand this concept, let's move to this one. Take their hand and move them gently from one point to the other. You are the author. You are in charge of the thought process that the reader is going through. So you are responsible for helping them understand how all of it fits together. They're not actually, at least not fully, responsible for making any of the connections themselves. Sure, maybe they're smart, maybe they can, maybe they are capable of analysis and synthesis and all those wonderful things, but it doesn't matter. You are the one responsible for doing the thinking and the explaining. You're the teacher, not the reader. Alright, let's connect the dots of what we've been talking about flow, so that it flows a little bit. Back to our story. Remember the pigs? What if those pigs were a metaphor for the pigs in the world? I mean, think about it. They went in and they stole the kid's food, and not only that, they replaced the kid's best friend. Can you do that? Can you just replace one friend with another? I mean, the public instructor was this kid's friend, and he just left it behind to take a pig? Okay, so a paper that's choppy is exactly what you would get coming in here and me reading this story to you and then explaining everything about the pigs. Wouldn't it be so much better if you came in and I start out by saying, well, class, we're going to read a story and we're going to look at some metaphors in the story because the characters represent some kinds of people. Some types of people are kind of like jerks. The pigs in the story are like the pigs in real life. They steal, they make messes, they even try to replace someone's friend. So listen to this story and see if you can tell that about the pigs in here. Now, I've introduced the story and you're thinking about metaphors and pigs, not thinking, why in the world is she reading this to me? And then after I read it, I could explain a little more in detail about what all the pigs did and make my points and explain what people in real life do and why that's not okay. Then I would have a paper where it's introduced. I give my evidence, I explain my evidence, I walk you through the thought process connecting each piece as we go to make it a gentle ride instead of choppy, like what you came into and were thrown into with thinking, what in the world's going on? I don't want to read your papers and wonder why in the world you're telling me what you're telling me. It's your job to lead me along.